Now, amid the challenges of climate change, many are talking about what's happening in the insurance industry. And our next segment is all about pushing the boundaries of insurability. We will look at reducing the global protection gap from the perspective of insurance. This session will look at how technology can help solve some of those challenges and how society can be helped back onto its feet in 2021. The conversation will be drawing from the personal experience of Christian Mumenthaler, who is Group Chief Executive Officer of Swiss Re. Moderating the session will be broadcast journalist Carolin Roth. So we now go over to Carolin and Christian to look at how these challenges in insurability can be solved.
Thank you so much for that, and it's such a pleasure to be here. It was such a tremendously difficult year for so many people. And let me get straight to my interview guest of today, Christian Mumenthaler, the CEO of the biggest reinsurance company in the world, Swiss Re. How are you? How was this year for you, first of all?
Hi, Carolin, first of all, and welcome everybody. So this was a difficult year, as you can imagine. We knew that pandemics could come. The insurance industry has been quite, forthcoming about that, and there have been publications in the past where we described that pandemic could come. But when it comes, it's always something different.
So a lot of people talked about this being a black swan event, which hit the global economy and everyone tied to that with full force. Is it something that we should have expected?
Absolutely, right? I think the description of why a black swan is the wrong one. Black swan would be something that is completely unexpected. And as with many risks in the world, actually experts knew it would come. Pandemics have always existed, and there's no reason to believe they will stop one day. They will transfer from animals to humans. This is a natural process. And as I said, we published papers in 2007, for example, the Chief Risk Officer Forum. I was one of the members. What would happen today if the influenza pandemic came back to 1918? And now, of course, there's a coronavirus, but a lot of things we described in 2007 actually happened this year, including financial markets, lower interest rates, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow, and no one was heeding that advice that at some point it was going to hit us. I mean, there are certain countries which even cut funding for the pandemic task force, for example. But let's get back to how 2020 looked, both for you on a professional and a personal level. Give us some insight of how this year really unfolded for you, for Christian Mumenthaler.
So I guess on the personal level, we're privileged. We live in Switzerland. We have a house, we have a garden. I'm a big, garden fan. And so we had a relatively normal life. And my kids are just under the age where they want to go out all the time. So they thought it's wonderful to have homeschooling, to have more time to play at home. So, from a family point of view, it wasn't that challenging. From a business point of view, it was challenging. Swiss Re had huge claims to pay and still upcoming. You had all the uncertainty. What do you do with the employees? How do you communicate? I mean, lots and lots of challenges throughout the years.
I want to talk a little bit more about communication now that you've mentioned it. I mean, help us understand how communication was shaped during a year in where most of your employees, I assume, worked from home. There were so many virtual meetings. How did you communicate with your employees, but also with your clients? And what does this different form of communication really do to the community spirit of a big company like Swiss Re?
Yeah, so I'm actually very happy how we did it and how many companies did it. But you go through different phases. In the beginning, you all have to transition to home. It's you're not used to it. Then I think there's probably a little moment of euphoria for some. It works. It's actually more practical. You can stay at home. There's some benefits. Again, not for everybody, but for many. And then over time, you have fatigue coming in, mental stress, because it's every day you're there. You start to mix private life with business life. And so from a leadership perspective, you have to think how to counter some of these things. How can you support people working from home? The communication style becomes more empathetic, I guess. You start to mix also your more private things into your conversation because you're also a human being. You struggle with the same thing they struggle with. So I think that changes, and then much more communication, much more. You need to reach out to people. Some people start to be very silent, which is a sign of maybe psychological distress. So we tried many things. We tried virtual aperos. We tried just to keep the community together. But the longer it lasts, the harder it is.
One phrase that you used before was showing leadership. And given that today's theme at the Singapore FinTech Festival is about leadership and about talent, let me ask you directly, what did you find out were the most important leadership skills that you sort of saw within yourself, within your team, around you during the course of the pandemic, and where were you maybe forced to step up and show greater leadership even?
Yes, it's a good question, and I don't pretend to have the answer, but maybe my view is the curiosity is really important, trying to understand what's happening. So I focused a lot on the pandemic, the biological facts, and the team helping me, because it helps me then to communicate with more confidence with people. The second one is probably agility. If you think everything can continue the way you thought before, it's not possible. And during the year, several times we had to adapt. First, we thought it's worse than it was. Then we thought it was too benign and it wasn't. Then you get surprised, right? You need to be able to react. But I think maybe the one that needed some change is this communication, the empathetic element of communication, because we all go to work and we're a different persona than the private persona. I think this is natural. We all do that. And we all sort of protect the private a bit from the others, which means that you are not yourself completely at work. And in this pandemic, I think it was important, and we started to automatically open up a bit, talk about the kids and the family, and the resonance was extremely positive. So you get a lot of positive energy from people hearing that that's what they need, and that's what you learn. You learn, okay, this is an important component, and I definitely think and hope we're going to keep that in our communication. So try to be more ourselves.
I guess
so empathy, I think, is really the key.
Empathy is key. But on the other hand, as you pointed out before, you're also a scientist by training. So combining the two, was that difficult for you?
I guess so. I guess, and that's the feedback I got. Yeah. My first, videos to everybody were very structured, very rational. I explained what's happening. People appreciated some of that, I guess. But then I figured out that and it's still difficult for me, but when I add a little bit something more personal, that's really, really resonates with people. I mean, we're not just rational beings; we're also emotional beings.
Let's flip the coin for a second, because I want to talk about the other side, the talent side, and I'm curious to find out from you what you found to be the most important trades or the skill set that was most conducive to adapting to this new environment. If you're hiring over the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, what are you going to be looking out for? And is it going to be any different from what maybe you were considering before the pandemic at all?
I think there's the skill question, which obviously, as we evolve as a Swiss Re, as the industry, you will start to need slightly different skills, data, technology, etc. But that's expected. That's not related to COVID. I think there's maybe an attitude element, slightly different to it, which is really important. And I think it's this agility as an attitude is super important, was super important this year. And you could see how it has increased in the organization, but everybody had to self-organize. It could not be top-down in such a chaos. Everybody goes home, they have to organize. There's tons of challenges that need to be overcome. And you can see the best came out from people. They're proud to work for the company. They try to do their best. And that collective, that gives you some assurance. And I think that is really important, this attitude. And then I guess diversity of thinking is super important, because some people are more conservative, some are more control-oriented, some are more visionary. And having diversity in all aspects, gender, race, everything, that has really come to the fore. And I think a good company should try to have as much diversity as possible, and not just in these dimensions, also the psychological dimension, I think, is really important. So you really get, when you face with uncertainty, you get all perspectives, how different people see it, which I think helps you to take better decisions.
Swiss Re, we both know that, is one of the biggest companies there is in the insurance space. You've got how many employees? Not a trick question, I'm just curious.
13,000, yeah.
Okay, so we know it's a huge company. We also know you have a very strong sense of hierarchy. And the insurance sector as a whole, not just Swiss Re, is sometimes, accused of not being maybe, agile enough, being quite conservative. I don't think you would disagree with me on that, but I'm wondering to what extent you've had to change quicker or adapt more quickly than you would have during the pandemic. Have you maybe become more agile, more nimble?
Yeah, so first to your point about hierarchy, I guess this is a philosophical question. My view is there's probably a universal justice in that, in theory, big companies would always win. They would always crush everybody because they have a huge advantage of scale and knowledge and all of that. But in reality, you can see there's always smaller companies who can come and win. And that's because they also have a disadvantage, a dyssynergy of scale. When you have 10 people, they can all do things. When you have 13,000 people, there's a lot of control loops, organizers, etc. Different roles come in. you get slower, and to a certain extent, that's natural. And of course, I know all CEOs want to be super agile and they pretend to be, but I think it's important to accept a certain level of that. If then you have a business like Swiss Re, where everybody rides on the same balance sheet, everybody's taking a huge risk, and one person can really destroy part of the balance sheet, I think it's natural that there's more oversight, there's more control,
right,
which makes things slower and can frustrate people. Whereas if you have a business which is very decentralized and people can run on their own, you might be able to get more agile. Now, within that, I think we made progress on agility this year because people went home, everybody went home. So you had to self-organize. And when we ask our employees every year how they feel about agility, this is the first year we make significant progress. And I don't think it's because of the leadership. I think it's because the experience that people had that actually it is possible.
I'm curious, in the same vein, were you also, because of all the disruptions that were happening in the way you've communicated, in the way you've operated, have you been forced to digitalize a lot quicker? I mean, I was talking to the CEO of a banking software company recently, and he told me that as a result of the pandemic, digitalization has been pushed some 5 years into the future. And that's a great thing because that's what we're aspiring to. How did you see things evolving at Swiss Re?
Yeah, I think in the insurance industry, I would be more nuanced. Reinsurance is probably a different business. It's very complicated transactions. There's not a lot of scale, etc. So the digitization is happening over time. I don't think we had an acceleration really of digitization. It was always very important. In the insurance sector, when I talk to CEOs, clearly they say, more psychologically, this gives them now the boost to accelerate a lot of programs they wanted to do anyway. So I think everybody is, but this is more a crisis phenomenon. You have a crisis, you shouldn't, let a good crisis, let pass by without having taken action. So I think there's a strong determination to accelerate things. I don't think that this year in particular was a huge acceleration because people couldn't yet work at full speed, but I expect a strong push.
What is your approach, though, to digitization in general? Because we're also at the same time seeing a huge rise in insurtech. It's a very important, a growing trend, and I wonder to what extent it's actually disruptive to your business, or whether you see it as a partner, whether you see it as a foe. Is it a little bit of both? What is it to you?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a hype around this whole topic. I would say that all insurance companies in the world are insurtech, if you want. They all use technology since 20, 30 years and use data to price risk, etc. And so, but all companies also realize there's a lot of new technology which can help nearly every value chain step of insurance. You can improve the claims processing, the underwriting, you can improve everything. CEOs see that. The disadvantage they have is they have thousands of existing legacy IT systems, and doing changes really takes a lot of time.
Right.
And this is where I think insurtech, the so-called insurtech, the smaller ones have an advantage. They start with fresh technology, they do something new, they can improve different value chain steps. Where will this lead to? I think they will collaborate a lot. They will be integrated, they will be bought, they partner up. I think it's very refreshing. It's interesting to see that. The one thing I'm not seeing is disruption. To me, that's a too strong word. Disruption would mean an insurtech coming and being so much better than others and having some network effects that propels them passing by the big insurance companies. And for that, they would need a sustained competitive advantage. And that's not happening. I'm not seeing one single case.
Let me challenge you on that, though. Is there still going to be the need for an insurance broker? I'm not talking about the reinsurance business, but more about the primary insurance business. The insurance broker, won't he be disintermediated?
So this is interesting. It's not insurtech. I think psychology is really the important factor. There's much more research now since the last 10, 20 years around human behavior. And buying insurance is a very unnatural act for human beings. That is studied, right? You have to think about the future. You have to think about negative things, etc. So it's unnatural. And that means that a lot of, I would say, naive insurtech come in and say, if I do something better product, people will surf the internet in the evening, will find it, they take me, and I'm bypassing everybody else. And that's not happening at all. Nowhere in the world is that happening. And that's because people don't like to think about it. They don't surf the internet. And therefore, they need sort of this support. They delegate to a broker, to an agent to help them. Now, agents might become electronic, digital. Maybe one day Siri can do that. But this support, this delegation to make sure somebody else does it for yourself, I think that is rooted in deep psychology. It's unlikely it's going to change, and I think it's a huge decelerator of disruption or change in the insurance industry.
That's fascinating to hear. Christian, I want to stay with technology for a moment, because for years, and not just during the pandemic, you at Swiss Re, you've been warning about the global protection gap. Maybe give us a sense of what you understand, under this term. Has it been accelerated by the pandemic, and how can technology really help in mitigating that issue?
Yeah. So protection gap is defined as the economic loss, the loss to the economy of a big event like a natural catastrophe, and how much is covered by insurance. And that gap is more than 50% across the world, everywhere. And so the question, our interest, of course, is to cover more people, but also our purpose is to make the world resilient. We need to extend to the rest. In some areas, we're making progress. For example, in emerging countries, they so far couldn't buy insurance. They have now more money. They're growing. They can do that. Or we help governments to protect the people. We're closing a little bit. I guess the biggest challenge is in the developed world. In California, only 13-15% of people buy earthquake insurance, even if they know it's going to happen. And that's back to this psychological problem. You can't really solve it through a cheaper product or something. Not more people will buy it. So the question is, if you want to close that protection gap, will people one day delegate the buying of insurance to somebody else? Will they buy it as part of another product so they don't have to go over this hurdle of buying it? What is needed? And this is one of the biggest challenges of the insurance industry, I would say. This not in the developing world, the growing world, is really in the developed world, where people know they should buy insurance and very often have the money to buy insurance, but are not buying it.
So you mentioned one of the examples, the California earthquake. The other one in a developed country, staying in the U.S., for example, is flooding. But you have made some headway there in terms of, I guess, I don't know whether it's persuading people, but, getting people to take on cover, correct?
Yes, I think back to psychology, it's also interesting how human works. When something has materialized, people see it, and then there's a huge attention to that risk. If it hasn't materialized, like pandemic before, nobody takes care. So flood, many people have seen it in the last few years. It becomes very present. So people are motivated to buy insurance. And obviously there's the national program, but there's also private programs where you can go very targeted. You can buy flood insurance. And you're absolutely right. That's a protection gap. We're making some significant progress in some countries, including the US.
All right, let's look ahead to 2021. It's December, thank goodness. I guess that's what a lot of people are thinking right now, almost 2021. Given that your job at Swiss Re is to assess and then price the risk, can you pinpoint a certain risk which you think will pose the gravest danger in 2021? Or does that question even, not even make sense at all? Because this year really taught us that, you can really insure yourself against every risk out there.
Yeah, I think we can just say what big risks are, but not whether they will come next year, maybe a probability. But if I think, so my own feeling is there's the geopolitical dimension, which is a potential issue. So can we get to an orderly world, back to an orderly world where this tension between the US and China is managed in a more constructive way? So that's a big thing that many smaller countries ask themselves. Then I would say cyber is a big concern to me personally. I think the risk is growing exponentially. The potential to attack, the frailty of the net, because everything is connected, also grows. So we haven't seen a big cyber attack yet, but you could imagine that. And then the longer term, and that's not the 2021, but longer term is clearly climate change. I mean, we're changing the composition of our atmosphere. That's a bad idea, and it will have consequences, and that's something that worries me a lot.
Right now, there's plenty of optimism out there because of the developments on the vaccine front, and that's extremely encouraging. But obviously, we're still going to have a couple of very difficult months, at least for many European countries. In Germany, they're talking about a hard lockdown again. How can we in the business community help people get back on their feet? And what are you at Swiss Re doing about that? What's your role, and what are your plans for 21?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, our role is to pay our claims. This is 3 billions. We're gonna, I mean, don't know exactly the amount, but we reserve 3 billion, so that's huge amounts, and we act as a shock absorber. I know it's a drop in the ocean in view of the enormity of the loss, but that's our main purpose. And then within our community, within our employees, I think we try really to make people more resilient. Otherwise, we cannot be a resilient business. So how do we deal with this stress? How do we manage ourselves through this crisis? And I think I share with you that I think within a few months, there's going to be a lot of vaccinations, things will go better. So on the health side, I certainly hope people will regain hope for the second half of next year. This should be a more normal life. What will hit us next year is the economic consequences of all of that, which have been dealt with by government so far. But that's going to be, it's going to shift from health to really the economy, in my view. And whatever we can take, it's hard to predict the future, but I think we know this is coming and we have to be prepared.
You're telling me you have no crystal ball?
No.
No one does. But you mentioned the role of the government, and I that's extremely important, because previously you've also said the government, in a way, must take on a bigger role, because we saw that a black swan event, even though you said before that maybe it wasn't really a black swan event, but it's not something you can insure against. Should the government play a greater role? Should they help society more? Because it can't all fall back on the insurance sector, really.
So I think it's very simple. If you have risks that you can diversify across the world. The insurance and reinsurance model works extremely well. We take risk from everywhere, we diversify them, we can deal with that. But there's a limited series of huge risks that attack everything at the same time. Pandemic is one. A huge cyber attack would be one. You can think about other things that are so large that the insurance industry cannot deal with it. In all of these cases, the government will have to pay anyway, like you see now. It's just a question, do they think about it ex ante or they do it ex post? If you do it ex post, you typically have no budget, no process. You don't know how to deal with it. It's chaos. It's difficult. You have a lot of waste. So what we always said, and we talk to governments about, is how can you, we're happy to help you structure that. We're happy to take a little bit of that risk. But for these big risks, how could you organize yourself? How could it be organized that we know in advance how this works? For example, a government insurance, everybody pays a small premium to be covered against pandemic, and it's exactly predefined when you pay it. The moment the government makes a lockdown, you pay it out to all the restaurants. These kind of things are feasible. You can do it. You can do it. It's just, will there be enough political will to do it? Will there be enough money, enough attention? And maybe in the next few years, there's a chance to do that. We had learnings from the 9/11. We had a lot of terror insurance pools. So this idea, this concept exists. The question is, will people be willing to expand it to, let's say, pandemic or a big cyber loss?
As you're talking to governments, do you get a sense that they are willing to take out more cover for these kind of, pandemic-related events, or do you think that their purse strings are simply too tight right now because they're paying so much in helping society get through this pandemic? Do you think it's been the big wake-up call that maybe we were all hoping for governments?
There's different responses. So some governments are definitely working on that. They see that because, again, every government will pay.
Right.
It's just a question, are you organized and have you thought about it in advance, or do you wait until it happens and then you sort of have to run around and try to support people, which is why I'm really passionate about this subject. You could say, why are you? It's not your business, it's the government business. But I think there's a way to organize things to minimize economic loss and loss of human life. It is possible. You can do it. And again, varied degrees. Obviously, government are very distracted right now, but some are working proactively on schemes like that.
We're almost running out of time, but Christian, one final question that I have to you is that, again, looking back at 2020, that really showed us the limits and the boundaries of insurability, and that really is what the title of this session is. Do you think that going forward, society, governments, as we talked about, businesses will have a better appreciation of what these limits really are? And as you said before, there's such a huge psychological component to taking out insurance. Do you think that psychology might change and there will be a greater willingness?
I'm sure people will be more aware about pandemics, that's for sure. But my worry or my hope is we go one step further and people think more broadly about all risk management and how to deal with that should these risks materialize. And so that would be a real game changer, because as I said in the beginning, most risks are known. Experts know about them. It's just people don't read it, don't take it seriously. They think this is, painting the black swan on the wall. I don't care. So if there's more consciousness around that, more interest to deal with risk and look at risk, that would be a great achievement.
And how can you, as a company, help make that case clearer? Is it through communication with your employees, through the media? Is it through governmental relations? What do you think is the most important path here, the most important avenue that you can take?
Would definitely try through media. I talk about it. I'm passionate about it. But the most promising angle is the governments, I think. Going through governments, sharing some best practice or some things we have seen and trying to persuade them or see what they can do. And I think a lot of people see if they could do a system like that, it would be better for their societies.
Christian, I want to thank you so much for your insights. It was fantastic to get those firsthand from someone who's been dealing with huge risk all year. And I think everyone, the audience, was very appreciative of your insights as well. That's it from here, from Zurich. Very snowy outside. And I guess where most of you are, possibly in Singapore, it's going to probably 30 degrees warmer. We want to thank everyone for their time and their attention. And again, Christian, it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And on that note, I will hand it back over to you. Thank you so much and have a great day and evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
And you too, Carolin and Christian, thank you so much for that. Yes, it is quite a few degrees warmer over here in Singapore. But helping us there understand that global protection gap was just so important and how companies like Swiss Re are trying to level the playing field.